Hey guys, Eric Smith here, 5 Reasons Sports contributor, also co host of Scouting the Fins. You can find that on the 5 Reasons YouTube channel and also on the 3 yards per carry feed. I'm not on the ground in South Florida for OTAs, but I've combed through the media availabilities and the notes from social media to bring you a summary of the first of 3 days of mandatory OTAs for the Miami Dolphins. First, let's start with Mike McDaniel's press conference from before practice. He talked about Zach Sealer, said that he has been in the building every day during the offseason program, and also that he would do some on field stuff, but didn't sound like he was going to be a full participant. On Jonnu Smith, he said, not to expect him on the field this week. He didn't specify the contract, but he said there was no secrets as to why he's not there. When asked about fines, again, he didn't specify it, but he said it's been communicated and they're all on the same page. Moving over to Jalen Ramsey, Mike McDaniel said he's not here, right? He said he wanted to be focused on building the Dolphins today. And any distractions not focused on that were not going to be, part of the discussion. Really didn't care even about how he personally felt about the situation. Said he separates his job from his feelings and controls the controllables and makes sure that people are moving in one direction appropriately. And he used the common phrase that business is business. Asked about excused absences, he said that Jalen Ramsey is the only excused absence, and that kind of leans towards Jonnu getting fined for not being here. Also makes a lot of sense for Jalen Ramsey to be excused. The team and Ramsey have both agreed that they were looking to move on this offseason, so it really doesn't, benefit them at all to either force him to be here or fine him for not being here. Just nothing good that can really come of that scenario. He was asked about Jair Alexander. Said, of course, that he's going to consider everything because that's their job. His, major focus is on the team itself, and that the conversations with Chris Greer regarding that are fluid. He also said there's a lot of nameplates from last year that are coming into work to make sure that you're underselling them, talking about the defensive backs that are returning this year. But he also, ended that with saying anything could happen and that he would adjust to whatever. Cam Smith, um, you know, Mike McDaniel talked about defensive play and pass coverage and how nobody really talks about eye discipline, right? Your alignment, your body posture, and where your eyes are. Those are all consistent variables when you're thinking about other things. And Cam has jumped into that portion of it full force. He used the phrase chopping wood, and that, he doesn't want the end result to be what's out there now. He wants to continue to see that growth from Cam Smith. And that there's still a lot of work to be built upon what he has put in. So that Cam's at a good spot for what's been developed this year, and for teammates to be able to count upon him, and also said that it's up to Cam to follow through without any setbacks every day moving forward. Thinks that today will be a good day for Cam Smith, and that kind of, is that a preview for the orange jersey for tomorrow? I guess we'll see. The rest of the corners, somebody asked about it being, anybody's job. And Mike McDaniel kind of, went off on his tangent the way that he does and talked about how, they're currently asking those players to develop their game, right? And when you're asking them to develop their game, you can't say they're accountable for the results because you're, trying to see how they are improving, not necessarily, looking at a final result and making a depth chart off of that. He pointed out that if a defensive back has 2 good days, then he's really waiting to see until that player gets beat, and that's where you really find out who you're dealing with, right? The way that they can bounce back from that type of thing, that's very key for defensive backs in the NFL. Said that he can't coach mental fortitude, that it takes to bounce back, and that he's not looking to figure out that depth chart today. This is where players begin to define themselves for the upcoming season. Asked about Ashton Davis. Mike said that Ashton's going to get the opportunity to earn the role that he covets, which is obviously a starting role, and that he has exemplified out of the gate the ability to be coachable and not just listening, right? But taking the key points of emphasis and applying those to every rep in practice. And, Mike wants to make sure that Ashton Davis's growth continues to stay linear, right? Doesn't just, hit his ceiling during OTAs, but continues to improve in this defense all the way through the preseason. Um, he was asked about whether growth or injury free was more important for OTAs. And he kind of jumped all over the place, but he said that, this is the 8th week together for the team in their ramp up. And he can start to see a vision of a team, like the rest of the league, has a 45 to 55% turnover. And he wants to make sure that every play that's a success on one side, whether it's the offense or the defense, is one that's earned. So that's kind of leaning towards the growth side of it, but he does specify that football is a 100% injury sport. It's a cost of doing business. And he feels good about the way they practice and protect each other. Said this is a key time to develop the standard for which your team moves and who they are as they define it. So that just, made me feel like they're going to, try to ramp up practices, try to be very competitive. But at the same time, being respectful of each other. You're not trying to go out there and injure a teammate, but definitely sounded like they're trying to pick up the tempo a little bit and make them compete more in practice. There was a question about Tua's yards per attempt or air yards per attempt being down. And, Mike McDaniel said he is the authority of space yards and, wanted to know what was the last year's, defense's spaces to eligibles ratio. How much is the defense playing off the line of scrimmage? What does the pass rush look like? And, those are things that when you look at the offense as a whole, right, when the ground game is not where they want it to be, you know, then you're not going to get the pre and the post snap looks that you want as well. And once you do get that ground game and own the line of scrimmage, then you're going to start to see those pre and post snap defenses changing, right? He went back to the phrase that explosives need to be earned, and that he, hopes that there'll be more of those explosive opportunities based on what the defense has to do with the improvement of the run game. He was asked about Chop Robinson, Bradley Chubb, and Jalen Phillips being on the field at the same time. Mike said that he's smiling more, and having the most talented players being the hardest working and the ones that have the most love for the game is gigantically beneficial and a tone setter. Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips were doing their best to impact the team coming back from injury, but it's a different presence that has to be, understated and gigantic, a word that he used again, to be able to be out there on the field. He also said that, it's key for the work for the tackles and the quarterbacks. When Chubb and Phillips bring their best, those tackles and quarterbacks are the ones who are really benefiting, right? Your edge rush production can help to calibrate your quarterback's internal clock, right? It's hard to roll your eyes at another practice when Bradley Chubb goes by. He's worked a year and a half for it. And that, I think that again just kind of goes back to having those guys out on the field, right? That kind of came up because Mike McDaniel mentioned the idea of, I think, kind of it being redundant going to practice, going out there in the heat, and just saying that when you have Bradley Chubb out there, it's hard to look at a guy like that that's worked so hard to get back and be like, oh, this is just another day. McDaniel was asked about Zach Wilson, and he said that as a football player, he's come as close to as much scrutiny as one can have. Mike sees a guy that's playing football with the empowerment that he is strong enough to handle anything. Said that he's got supreme arm talent, and it's cool to watch him grow in this offense. And he also mentioned that, guys with that kind of arm talent, they always throw a little late because they, always feel like they can, overcome stuff with their arm, right? And they're trying to kind of harness that and teach him how to play within the offense. There was a question about Austin Jackson and Alec Ingold, and how they affected the run game, how the run game fell off without them. And Mike McDaniel used the phrase that it's more causation than correlation, and he really focused on Ingold with his answer. But he talked about Ingold making blocks from the backfield and how half of the team that's adjacent to him has better angles at their blocks. It says not only executing his, being Ingold's blocks, but it's also made the angles better for the center. And that's one of those things that is a guy that really focuses on the run game side of it. I can picture what he's saying there. When you look at the zone blocking scheme and the way that, all the assignments line up, if you don't have that fullback and that 21 type personnel, then you know everybody's bumped over one. You're taking tougher angles to get to your second level blocks, especially. But when you have the fullback in there and he's leading to that strong side linebacker or the run side linebacker, then everybody's combos kind of bump over one, and it makes the angles a lot more favorable. So I thought that was a really neat point that he made. And then the last thing that he had from his press conference was about, teaching Tua reinforcements to avoid unnecessary hits. And, Mike said that you plan so that you're hitting all cylinders if your quarterback's not playing, but you obviously want a franchise quarterback playing. 2024 for Tua was, realizing in the most egregiously slow, painful way the residual effects of not having him on the field. So he said that, Tua has started the offseason with that as primary importance. And that kind of wrapped up the Mike McDaniel press conference side of it. So as we go into the notes here for the on-field stuff, this came from a variety of the beat reporters that were in attendance. Tanner Connor was wearing the orange jersey today, and that's fairly significant considering that Jonnu Smith was not there. Also said that James Daniels got light work, but he was not in any of the team drills. Said that Tyreek Hill was catching passes in position drills, and that's the first time he's been doing that for the team since the wrist surgery in the offseason, but he still didn't participate in the team drills either. Waddle had another strong day in camp, including a 40-yard touchdown pass from Tua. And it sounds like Tua had a good day also, wrapping up the practice with a 55-yard touchdown pass to Malik Washington. And I believe it was Artie Burns that was in close coverage on that one. Nick Westbrook-Akine had 3 touchdowns in the red zone. He was up, catching passes above the rim, both from Tua and from Zach Wilson. All of the backs, so Achane, Wright, Madison, and Ollie Gordon caught touchdowns during the red zone period. So that's a good sign in terms of their involvement in the passing game. Cornerbacks, so they had a pretty good day overall. It sounds like they played really physical, forcing wide receivers to reroute and leading to multiple picks. Dante Trader Jr., Isaiah Johnson, Elijah Campbell were all part of that. I think that when we talk about the defense, I think it was Javon Holland may have said about how the defense kind of uses the safeties to put a kind of a shell on the defense. I think that when you're working with young physical corners, that's kind of what you want to have. So I think that's kind of important in terms of the type of defense they're trying to play, where maybe you don't need those corners that are, super high IQ, super experienced. You can go for more of the toolsy physical guys that can, play up the line of scrimmage and challenge the receivers, knowing that, if they get beat off the line of scrimmage, that you have safeties over the top that are going to keep a top on it. You saw the Patriots do that for years under Belichick's defense. There were sacks in this OTA from Chop Robinson, KJ Britt, and Grayson Murphy. Grayson Murphy was the only one that really expanded on, saying that one came against Patrick Paul. Obviously, these are not padded practices, not going to look too much into that one way or another. As we get into the post-practice media availabilities, so Tua was the only one that was available on the Dolphins YouTube channel. He was asked if he was team pay Jonnu, and his response was 100%. Said he's still working with Jonnu outside the facility, and that he's been able to work with Tyreek, even without Tyreek being able to catch passes, working on timing, and things like that. Tua said his hip is fine, and that it started feeling better back in February. Did not reveal the exact injury. But he did say that he's doing everything he can to stay available for the guys, right? Knowing when it's time to give up on a play. Said that longevity for him is more important than that one play, and that for him to compete comes natural. So he's fighting with that every time he's trying to extend a play where he really needs to learn to play for the next down. And he went on with that, talking about his mindset shift to get into the habit of getting rid of the ball, even in practice, and understanding that, in game situations, those guys can hit him. So trying to bring that game feel into practice and get rid of the ball, on time in practice as well. He talked about a culture shift, talking about a change of scenery for the guys in his locker room, talked about this being his sixth season. Also mentioned it's kind of a move for the coaches too, where players get more of a chance to lead than the coaches. I think a big part of that, as I've talked about multiple times, is just the continuity in schemes, returning the same offensive and defensive coordinators, that your leaders on the team, like your Tuas, your Zach Sealers, those type of guys have been in these systems for multiple years now, and those guys aren't themselves learning the system from ground up. So now it really provides an opportunity for them to take more of the leadership role and let the coaches do more of the fine tuning. Tua talked about Zach Wilson, said that he hates that the media can't see the strides that both Zach Wilson and Quinn Ewers have made, and that today's practice, which wasn't great for the backup quarterbacks, was not a fair assessment of where those guys are. He compared their progress to his own experiences in his first year in Mike McDaniel's offense. And Tua also talked about his chemistry with Tyreek over the past 2 years and how this offseason has allowed him to build that with Waddle. And he said that he's excited about how that can look for Waddle heading into training camp. Um, Brought up the point, kind of back to the culture, said, are you not tired of what we've done these past 5 years? What are we doing to change or correct the navigation of where we want to go? He said you got to create that standard in the locker room, and then you got to go out in the practice field and uphold it. And then on top of that, you need to have guys around you that will uphold you to that standard when you're not meeting it. So, you know, to also mention that in this year's OTAs, you can see, and it should make you hopeful with the kind of team that they have, because it's not just one side, dominating the entire day the way that it has been in previous years OTAs, where one side was, way ahead of the other. And again, that kind of goes back to the idea of bringing the same systems and schemes back for the second year in a row, having the same offensive and defensive coordinators for the first time in the last decade. Tua said that he wants to spend some more time with a few of the guys in the field so the distribution of the ball becomes more evident, and that he can build the trust that when, one guy, his primary guy, is not open, that he can really trust the other ones. And that kind of wrapped it up for the Tua media availabilities. And it seems like there were some other media availabilities, including Benito Jones, Cam Smith, and Ashton Davis. But as of this recording, there seem to be limited notes on those on social media. And those videos weren't posted on the Dolphins YouTube channel. So I don't really have any details on what was said with those guys. So hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope this was a little enlightening as to the way that today's, first mandatory OTA practice went. And we'll see how it leads into day 2 tomorrow. Appreciate you guys watching, and we'll talk again soon.